the Civil War, when amendments were added to include the formerly enslaved people in the body politic, in that phrase, "we the people." And after that, the 19th Amendment was added to include women, white women, in "we the people." And then later, as you may recall, I think we all recall, we had an amendment that lowered the age for voting to include younger people as they were, going off to Vietnam since they could die. Somebody said, oh, maybe they should vote. So we've been on a journey that seemed to be moving in the direction of expanding "we the people." And we also have Article 4, Section 4 in our Constitution that says that the United States guarantees to every state a Republican form of government. Our country was not conceived of as a direct democracy. We have a Congress to which the people elect representatives. So we have representatives in the lower house and we have senators in the upper house. We have a Republican form of government, not only at the federal level, but at the state and local levels. We elect representatives, and those elected officials are our voice as we, the people. Now, it's important to understand that the federal government does not draw the lines, the districts from which any representatives are elected. State legislatures draw the lines for congressional districts. State legislatures also draw the lines for the state legislature, and most states have 2 houses in their legislature. This is the districting and redistricting that occurs after every census. So every 10 years, there is this massive effort throughout the country to redraw district lines. And this is for Congress, for the state legislature, for our Board of Aldermen, for the county supervisors of Lafayette County. Any jurisdiction that elects folks does this redistricting every 10 years after the census. And that is because you may have heard, it's kind of civics 101, one person, one vote. We're supposed to have in the lower house, let's say of Congress, election districts that are relatively similar in population. We draw electoral districts of every kind based upon the census data about the population. And that includes men, women, children. It's just based on what that number is. It's not citizen voting age population. It's not, it does not exclude non-citizens. It is the total population of any jurisdiction. And that is because not only is our government about the power of the citizen to vote, but our Constitution protects non-citizens as well. Our constitutional protections are for everyone within the boundaries of and under the jurisdiction of the United States of America. So there is in the Constitution, in the First Amendment, there's, in addition to what we're all familiar with in terms of freedom of expression, there is a right to petition the government for redress of grievances. And everyone, citizen or non-citizen, has that right. So we want electoral jurisdictions to have the same, relatively same number of people. We want the Board of Aldermen, we want each alderperson to represent roughly the same number of people. We call that one person, one vote. But that really obscures what's really important. And I'm going to ask Ruth now to pull up a graphic that I got from the League of Women Voters several years ago. And I think it is the most useful thing to help us understand what's really important. Ruth, if you could enlarge that just a bit. Here it comes, wait for it. It's coming. What you will see on this graphic when you see it is a rectangle. And we're going to make that rectangle our political jurisdiction. And in our political jurisdiction, there are 50 people. Now, this applies whether you're talking about the county, whether you're talking about the Board of Aldermen, whether you're talking about the state legislature, whether you're talking about congressional districts. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to say that there are 50 people in the city of Oxford. And we've got blue people and red people. And ever since, in our hypothetical, ever since the founding of the city of Oxford, if you go back and do analysis of elections, beginning with the founding of the city, you will find that the red people vote as a block for candidate A over and over and over again. And the blue people consistently vote as a block for candidate B since the beginning of time, whatever characteristics candidates A and B may have. They might be Black folks, red might be Black folks, and blue might be white folks. Red might be Democrats and blue might be Republicans. Any kind of a political affiliation that results in people consistently over time, block voting, expressing different choices around policies, around candidates, about parties. So here's our 50 people. Now, if this were a city government, in which there were 5 members of the Board of Aldermen, and everybody, all 50 people, get to vote for candidates running for those 5 slots. If the election were held in this jurisdiction with everyone being able to vote for 5 candidates, all 5 winners would be blue. Now, in this scenario, each person has 1 vote. There's not a situation where 2 people, have 3 votes and a bunch of other people have 5 votes and some people have 1. So the 1 person, 1 vote principle doesn't really address this, because in our jurisprudence and in our federal laws, we say there's something wrong with this. Because not only are you supposed to have 1 person, 1 vote be equal in the distribution of population across districts, but we also have, as participants in our electoral system, the right to fully participate in the political process and elect candidates of choice. If over and over and over again, the red people never have the opportunity to elect candidates of their choice, their right to participate fully in the political process is infringed upon. And our federal laws and jurisprudence, court decisions say this is not what we mean to have in our Republican form of government. And so we have, in the city of Oxford, we have a board of aldermen, and we have, let's say we have, I don't know how many we have. Anyway, let's say this, in our hypothetical, there are 5 of them. Well, one way to draw the districts would be to do the very next graph. And you see there that the lines are simply drawn up and down, vertical lines. We've got 5 districts. And in that configuration, blue does extremely well. It has 3 districts, and the red folks have 2 districts. And so they will then send their representatives to the Board of Aldermen. And since the red people are 40% of the population and the blue people are 60% of the population, this is perfect representation. And so we would have a Board of Aldermen where there are 3 blues and 2 reds. And let me address this question that people sometimes ask. Well, if there are 3 blues and 2 reds, and they're all sitting there on the Board of Aldermen, wouldn't we expect the blues to just consistently outvote the 2 red representatives, just as would be the case if there were an at-large election? And the reality is that when we have had that circumstance, in most cases, up until these last 10 years, I would say, what happens when elected officials are in a deliberative body, they actually have a sense of representing not just their district, but they represent the city of Oxford, for example. And so they work together, they collaborate, they compromise. The blues, want the reds to be a part of governing the city. And the blues want to serve the red people in the city because they care about the entire city. That is the expectation of our electoral system, although that has, of course, broken down here lately. But here's another way that the districts could be drawn for our 5-person Board of Aldermen. You could draw these districts so that there are 5 blue districts and there are no red districts. Blue would win each and every seat on the Board of Aldermen. This is a gerrymander because blues are only 60% of the population, and yet they completely control the Board of Aldermen. There's no opportunity for the red people to have any influence in the governing of their city. They have 1 person, 1 vote, but they do not have the opportunity to participate fully in the political process as we now understand it. And then there's another way that the districts could be drawn in the city of Oxford, and that's the last graph. And so the lines could be drawn so that there are only 2 blue districts and 3 red districts, although the blue folks are 60% of the population. That's also a gerrymander. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about gerrymandering. Now, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed to ensure that racial minorities have the opportunity to participate fully in the political process and elect candidates of their choice. And because of that act, we examine redistricting plans. Let's go back to the first graph, and we'll say all the red people are Black and all the blue people are white. We would look in if they are voting consistently differently. We say that is evidence of racially polarized voting. If instead of being a matter of race, it is a matter of language. I did voting rights litigation in California, and in 1975, the Voting Rights Act was amended to add language minority protections. So in California, I represented lots of Latino communities as well as Black communities, where in California there was indeed racially polarized or language polarized voting just as extreme as here in Mississippi. In fact, the first case I won out there, the defense attorney would start each day of the trial by saying, "Your Honor, this is California, this is not Mississippi." But of course, the voting patterns were exactly the same as Mississippi, and we did win. What happens to our notion of we the people governing ourselves through a Republican form of government if we have, you know, the third graph where we've got 5 blue districts and 0 red districts? We end up with something that is happening across the country now in certain states where you have partisan gerrymandering that undermines the idea of this being a representative form of government, and in which people have the opportunity to fully participate in the political process. What we have, look at the very last one, where you have only 2 blue districts and you have 3 red districts, and red wins, although red is only 40% of the population. There are now state legislatures where that is the case. And so we are venturing into a new era of minority-controlled state legislatures. In Wisconsin is one of those places, and I can't rattle off all the places where this has occurred, but in Wisconsin, Republicans and Democrats in the state are about 50-50 if you analyze voting patterns over a period of time. And yet, the Republican-drawn districts excessively represent, control the state legislature. So the districting map for Wisconsin looks like this last one. And this is what undermines our democracy. And when you have that kind of distortion of the opportunity to participate fully in the political process, you have limited accountability, and it ends up creating a government that is really unresponsive to the people. You would not expect a board of aldermen that looks like this last graph to really be concerned about, you know, what's happening with the blue folks in the population. So there are efforts to remove politics from the drawing of district lines, and some states have now adopted commissions to to move this process from the state legislatures and from other political bodies. And even when political bodies like state legislatures do the redistricting, they do it by hiring consultants. You know, you don't see the guys down in Jackson sitting around with maps. They hire consultants. This is highly politicized. And now, because of the advances that we have in computer technology, the blocks of people that are used to build out these maps begins at the precinct level. And so if you look at your voter registration card, you know that you are in a particular precinct in Lafayette County or in the city of Oxford. You're in a precinct. Those are the building blocks for these plans. And because of computer technology, the district lines can be drawn with very, very, very fine precision. When I started out doing this work, we did all this stuff by hand, and someone with fortitude really worked out on a calculator, and it took months to draw these plans. Now you can spit out 100 plans in a couple of minutes using a computer. So the problematic gerrymandering has just exploded because of the efficiency of the new technology. So I'm going to stop there and take I wanted to say there are neutral principles that can be used to get the partisan politics and racial politics out of drawing these boundaries. And the first thing is, of course, the right to participate fully in the political process and elect candidates of choice. And then these maps are supposed to be drawn using 3 principles. Communities of interest should be grouped together. The districts should be compact so that the elected representative has a reasonable district to negotiate. And you don't have, these bizarre lines where, part of the district is really 1 block wide. And then the third principle is contiguity. The district is supposed to be connected. You're not supposed to have one part of your district in the northwest corner of town and the other part of your district in the southeast corner of the town. They're supposed to meet up, be connected. So communities of interest, compactness, and contiguity, meaning connected. One of the problems with what's currently been done in Jackson with the Delta District is that it is no longer compacted, and it connects communities of interest that run along the eastern side of the Mississippi River, communities of interest in the Delta, which are quite different from the communities down along the southwest part of the state. So people are troubled by that new configuration, one, because of communities of interest, and it is certainly not compact. And it's difficult for any single representative to adequately represent such a diverse set of interest and communities. So that's what we're dealing with here in Mississippi. But the biggest danger to our democracy right now is that we have these gerrymandered plans that result in minority control of state legislatures. So, and we do have, and before anybody asks about it, let me say something about the US Senate. The US Senate is an anti-democratic creature, but it was put in place to ensure that there is, it is supposed to be one of those checks and balances to mitigate what might be the populism of the House of Representatives. And so we have, you know, 2 people from each state. And the Democrats in the state Senate actually represent many more people than the Republicans in the state, in the US Senate. But that's baked into our Constitution as part of the checks and balances that we want in a Republican form of government. Related to that, there are, of course, lots of conversations going on right now about the Electoral College, which is similarly afflicted. But that's another conversation. So let's talk about gerrymandering and maps.
Okay, Barbara, thank you for that. A very informative overview. Appreciate that. I just want to remind everybody that if they have questions for Barbara, please put them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat, and I'll be happy to make sure Barbara sees them. And perhaps Don, if his phone begins to work, he will work with me as moderator. But in the beginning, Barbara, let me kick it off with this question. And I'm warning everybody else, this is a lawyer talking to a lawyer, so stop us if it gets crazy. All right. My question is, the Supreme Court has made a distinction between drawing maps for political versus race purposes. And yes, the court has said that drawing maps to suit political goals is constitutional. However, yes, drawing maps for racial purposes is unconstitutional. Can you speak to us a little bit about that and how you might tell one from the other?
It's an unprincipled decision by the majority of the justices on the court, and the dissents speak to what is an abandonment of principle in coming to that decision, because federal courts have been deciding partisan gerrymandering cases for decades. So it is what the Supreme Court said was that, yes, this violates the partisan gerrymandering, violates the Constitution, but we don't know what to do about it. And so we're not going to deal with it. It's non-justiciable, which is just, it has been justiciable for decades. But that's what we live with now, is that the Supreme Court says partisan gerrymandering can go on from now till the cows come home, and it will not touch it. The complicating, what may be complicating in analysis is that now that the Republican Party has become the party of white supremacy and white folks, it is often the case that if you overlay on a population a mapping of Democratic voters and Republican voters, you may get the same pattern as you would if you overlaid an inquiry into Black folks and white folks. So how do you distinguish whether these lines have been drawn for the purpose of partisan gerrymandering, as opposed to have these lines been drawn on the basis of race? So that has complicated things now. But one, that Supreme Court decision is simply wrong. The federal courts have been adjudicating partisan gerrymandering, and now the Supreme Court, this Supreme Court says they're just not going to. So the fact that we will end up with minority controlled state legislatures and cities and, you know, everything else, Congress even, the Supreme Court says that's just okay. It has not, that has not always been the case, but that's the reality right now.
Thank you. You also made reference to some attempts in different states. I'm going to take us out of Mississippi for a second here. Some states to try alternative processes for drawing the maps. One that comes to mind is committees. Can you make a few comments about what some of these alternatives are and how well they are working or perhaps not working?
I don't know how they are working. I know California, for example, has a commission that does the redistricting with the intention of taking it out of the realm of politics. And there are other states that are doing that. There are a few, I don't really know the rest of them. But what I understand about them is that they set forth, the legislation prescribes what the consideration should be in drawing the districts. And the independent commission is expected to, follow that criteria. And the hope is that that would prevent nefarious activities and line drawing. I don't yet understand how one ensures that those commissions are independent, since they are appointed by political elected office holders. So, it is being touted by, I think Common Cause is a big proponent of these commissions, and there are several states that are using them. So I think it's something worth looking into. I think for people who want to explore that sort of alternative, the Brennan Center for Justice.org is an excellent resource on all things electoral. So I would recommend that people who are interested in that can go to that site and find very reliable information, not propaganda, but information about how those systems work. I think they're a great idea. I just don't understand how they can be independent in the real world. But so and we could look at the track record of a place like California to see how it's working. So we've got some experiments going on out there. It's not just hypothetical anymore. So they're there to look at, and we can see how it's working.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat from Ruth Odell, and I'll just precede this with saying, this sounds like something that would give a lot of lawyers work for a long time. Is there any kind of legislation that could be proposed that would outlaw gerrymandering?
Is there any kind of?
I'll reread it. Is there any kind of legislation that could be proposed that would outlaw gerrymandering? In other words, can we make gerrymandering illegal?
I think we could, and there's language in the court decisions that have thrown out districting plans because they infringe upon the right to participate fully in the political process and elect candidates of choice, from which I think we could pull specific language that, because it's embedded in a court decision, would have substantive meaning. So I believe it's possible to do that. I haven't attempted it yet, and there may be something at the Brennan Center that does that, but yeah, of course it could be done. Of course it could be done.
And it would take, and this is the big thing, no matter what question you're asking about, whether it could be made legal or illegal, is there the political will?
Exactly.
Political will.
We are, we are rolling in the mud on politics and with this issue.
All right, we have another question, and this one is from B. Glover from Parents for Public Schools. Can you speak about the success rate of litigation regarding gerrymandering at the state level, or at least in Mississippi?
Huh. Let me say that the litigation in which I've been involved has always been in federal court. However, there are states, the recent decision by the Supreme Court in two cases not to accept an emergency appeal from Republican challengers had to do with state court decisions. So we have not only the federal constitution and laws protecting the right to vote, we have state constitutions and laws protecting the right to vote. So we do have some states that some litigation happening in state courts that's being successful. In the past, litigation in the federal court has been very successful under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, litigation on behalf of racial and language minorities. However, the current Supreme Court has severely undermined the Voting Rights Act of 1965, finding parts of it unconstitutional, despite the fact that it had those parts of the act have been approved by Congress practically unanimously by both Republicans and Democrats for decades. So we no longer have the Voting Rights Act. It's very difficult now for voting rights litigation to be successful in federal court unless one can prove discriminatory intent. And it's a very high bar.
And just to jump in on that case, part of the rationale for gutting the Voting Rights Act was it's an old law. It's not like that anymore. That,
right. And the court completely ignored hundreds of pages of testimony in Congress establishing the current terrible conditions of, persistent racially polarized voting and obstacles to racial and language minorities to participate fully in the political process. The court simply ignored the evidence of the current need for the protections of the Voting Rights Act.
and one might read that as how out of touch Supreme Court justices can be with the real world because of, where they are and how isolated they are in so many
Yes,
ways.
but they're supposed to be able to read the factual record of the hearings before Congress, whether they have lived it or not, and they just ignored the evidentiary evidence that had been presented to Congress.
Well, we have another question. This is from Deirdre Payne. With the two major parties identified by race and voter suppression laws aimed at Democratic voters increasing across the country, is it possible to return to a two-party system within the next 10 years? Or are we returning to antebellum patterns of voting being exclusively the right of landowners?
Well, I keep a bottle of bourbon when I contemplate the question, that question. I wish I knew. Right now, it's grim. I mean, this is when I got involved in voting rights litigation. I mean, this country was on a forward march to expand. Who's included in we the people? And without any evidence of voter fraud, We now have had the introduction of all sorts of state laws that make it extremely difficult, not only to register to vote, but are making it difficult to actually cast your ballot. I did not think in my lifetime I would see this country marching back to the 19th century. And that's what those laws are doing. They are marching us backward and restricting the franchise. And you know, like I said, I keep a bottle of bourbon. You know, this is the danger that our democracy actually faces. And I don't think it's, you know, Chicken Little sky is falling to say that our democracy is in grave danger.
Okay, our colleague Don Mason has something he'd like to add in. Don, your turn.
Okay.
All right.
I didn't realize I did. But first off, I want to apologize for not being with you all at the outset. I'm really sorry. I'm sure that Joanne or Ruby.
Technology gremlins.
Yes, technology gremlins. Okay, so Barbara, it's always a pleasure to be with you when you're talking about gerrymandering. You're such an expert, and you already touched on some of the things I was mainly interested in having you discuss. You know, and Joanne may have been referencing the, and if you've already talked about this, forgive me, but the cases like out of North Carolina and Pennsylvania and so forth, where because of the U.S. Supreme Court's deference or whatever you want to call it, they're sort of giving carte blanche to partisan gerrymandering under the U.S. Constitution. We're seeing cases now coming through the state courts, and you've already touched on that. But you know, I just want folks to understand that what you're talking about are cases where they're decided in terms of people's rights, but the rights that are delineated under those respective states' constitutions versus the U.S. Constitution. And I totally agree with you, though, that you know our basic rights under the U.S. Constitution should protect us as well. But anyway, my question for you then on this is how do you foresee the success of those cases going forward? Do you think that there's some hope there in terms of these state constitutional attacks on? Because you're right, we have state after state where we have minority control, and the courts, as has been often the case, and you've been heavily involved in these actions, the courts are our last hope, our last line of defense. What do you feel about that? Do you think there's some hope there?
Well, I think
know.
some hope, but it's so limited because it's limited to those states that have those kinds of constitutions and those kind of state court judges. You know, we don't have that here. That's not going to help us in Mississippi.
No.
But for those places that have those kinds of constitutions and have those kinds of judges, it puts the U.S. Supreme Court in a real conundrum. And I think we have to see how it will, while it has denied the emergency appeal from these two Republican challengers. When those cases, if they accept those cases, they are going to, you know, maybe be hoisted on their own petard about, you know, their glorification of the states' rights. If the state, when the state court judges are rejecting, partisan gerrymandering, what are they going to do? Since they say that under the federal, under the Constitution, those things are non-justiciable. So I have no idea what's really going to happen when push comes to shove.
Yeah.
If and when those things actually get before the Supreme Court on the merits. But for those folks who live in states that have good constitutions that protect the right to vote and their judges are giving good decisions, and I hope those are pursued, as much as they can be. That those will be our only hope. But we don't have that. That doesn't help us in Mississippi at all.
Right. Yeah, the decisions that we've seen so far seem to be from sort of the swing states, or the states also where the courts themselves are under threat. I mean, these decisions may be 4-3 or whatever. So we're talking about they're hanging by a thread, basically.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think I saw, Joanne, I think I saw a comment just now that indicates perhaps we have someone on the call from Pennsylvania. Is that right? Or somebody moved here from
There is somebody from the League of Women's Voter from Pennsylvania.
Oh,
I wonder if
do they have
I
some
wonder if she had
thoughts?
a comment about it.
Oh, she's here. I hope I pronounced this correctly. Amy Clesis. Her comment is, we are celebrating in capital letters, celebrating in Pennsylvania because of a grassroots group, Fair Districts Pennsylvania, who have been working for years for fair maps. It looks like if we can turn out the vote, things should be more fair than it has been for decades, also in caps. At least for now, it is looking better. So that's one of our
I'm
comments.
ready for good news from anywhere. That's terrific.
Well, Pennsylvania in particular has been such an important state in the last couple of presidential elections that this is extraordinarily good news. And yeah, Amy, would you like to add anything to that? You can unmute yourself if you'd like to verbally join the conversation.
I'm not an expert, but I have been following things, and they're getting attacked. We had a very fair legislative commission, totally got attacked for making fair decisions. And then the congressional maps were taken to the PA Supreme Court, totally attacked them, and went to the US Supreme Court. So lots of attacks going on, but so far the decisions have led us, say, at least for the primary, but again, it's not a done deal, I guess, with the congressional maps, right? So we're hoping that they don't pick this up. And, I totally agree with everything you've said about it all.
Well,
But
congratulations to you and years of hard work.
it's been Fair Districts. Yeah, they're a group that is affiliated with, they're a part of our League of Women Voters in Pennsylvania, but they've been separate, but they've just done an amazing job. So yeah, it goes to them. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to applaud the League of Women Voters for its decades of engagement in trying to ensure that we have a democracy and a Republican form of government. The League of Women Voters has been a plaintiff for decades in litigation in federal court to ensure that people have the right to participate fully in the political process. The League of Women Voters has been a very important partner in promoting and promoting our democracy. It's been very important.
And absolutely agree. And we have 2 minutes left in our allotted time. There's one more question. Barbara, if you can address this quickly. If the John Lewis Freedom to Vote Act would be passed, would that limit gerrymandering?
I don't know what its impact would be on gerrymandering. I don't know.
Okay, that's a good answer, and it fits the time limit. So thank you very much. We had another question popped up. Let's take it. This is from Amy. Just a second. Amy Rita. what is the process here in Mississippi for the state and local redistricting? And is it handled by the same persons who work on the federal redistricting?
No, the state legislature hires its consultants, and the Republican Party hires a consultant, the Democrats hire consultants, and they draft these maps and pass them in the state legislature. Our town hires somebody to draw maps based on the 2020 census, and our Board of Aldermen approved. And didn't they do that, Don, just a month or so ago? There was redistricting
so.
not long ago, right?
Oh,
So-
it was in the news. I don't know
Yeah.
if they finished it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the county board of supervisors will hire someone, but the board itself, I mean, they hire someone, but it is the decision of the county board of supervisors. It's the decision of the board of aldermen. It's the decision of the Mississippi State Legislature to adopt redistricting plans.
Okay, one quick comment and one offer of assistance. The comment from B. Glover, Parents for Public Schools, is if you haven't read Unrigged by David Daly, I highly recommend it. The League of Women Voters is mentioned no less than 16 times. So that's something positive. And then the last comment I think we're going to have time for, this is from one of our attendees, Lindbergh. He says, I am a recently retired lawyer, practiced in California for 40 plus years. Now I'm in Mississippi. I would like to volunteer in whatever way I can. Suggestions on who or which organizations I might contact? Perhaps
Don
Barbara?
Mason, contact Don.
Okay, Don Mason.
I mean, is that right? Yeah, contact Don Mason.
Okay.
And you can each send me your email address and I will make sure it gets to you.
Okay.
All right.
And with that, I want to, go ahead, Don.
No, I know we're past the time, but I just wanted to add a quick comment,
Sure.
not to complicate things, but if you just recently, since the last time I heard Barbara speak on this topic, I noticed that in the New York Times, they've turned basically the gerrymandering into another game, kind of like Wordle and so forth. Because if just check out New York Times gerrymandering, you'll see they've got a lot of resources on it. And one of them is, like I say, they've turned it into a game where they say, okay, here's your task, and you've got to consider kind of the things Barbara talked about, contiguity, compactness, etc., but communities of interest. And so it makes for a real challenge because they say, you know, here's your hypothetical state, here's where people live, now draw the districts. And anyhow,
Oh, that's
it just
fantastic.
illustrates.
That's really good.
Yeah,
That's-
it is. Yeah, check that out. It's really interesting. Okay, that's it.
Well,
Again,
that's-
I'm sorry I was late.
And Don, I'm going to give you this email address right now so we close the loop from Lindbergh. His email address is
Great.
Lindbergh P, LINDBERGHP @gmail.com.
Great.
So balls in your court, contact Lindbergh.
Okay.
Barbara, thank you. Your information and your clarity has been a real contribution.
Well,
Thank you very
thank
much.
you. Thank you. And thank you to the league for
I'm-
doing this.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Hand this over to Evelyn now. Evelyn is going to tell you about the future sessions. Evelyn?
Okay. Joanne, I want to thank you for standing in the gap today. You did an excellent job. And Barbara, thank you so much for your information that you shared with us.
You're welcome.
Very important and was very enlightening. I want to thank the audience for participating as well. Our next meeting will be held March 23rd. We will skip a week. And this meeting, this next Democracy in Crisis conversation is attack on elected officials.
Mm.
The speaker will be Secretary of State Michael Watson, and he's Secretary of State of Mississippi, and Joanne Gabrenowitz, who moderated tonight, will be our moderator for that event. Our final conversation, Manipulating the Electoral College, will feature Adam Ambrosi. He is Senior Director for Voting and Elections, and he's with the League of Women Voters US. Ruth Odell, a co-president of the League of Women Voters, will act as moderator for that conversation. We hope you join us for the last two sessions, and thank you for your
When
attendance.
Evelyn, when is the electoral college session?
The Electoral College is March 30th. That's our last event, our last conversation. Okay. Thank you so much for your attendance, and good night.
Thank you.